What happens when you feed the same backyard birds every day for a year? At 6:14 on a Tuesday morning in early February, before the sun had cleared the roofline, the chickadee pair showed up at my tube feeder. Same time, same feeder, same order. Male first, female second, quick grab and gone. Same as last Tuesday, same as the Tuesday before that. I've been watching it for 4 winters now. You might have something like this in your yard, a bird or a pair of birds that comes so regularly you've started to notice when they don't show up. You refill the feeder and you watch, and after a while, if you're honest, you stop thinking of it as feeding birds and start thinking of it as keeping an appointment. I do. I stopped being surprised by that about 2 years in. Here's what I didn't understand when I started. I thought I was the one doing something, buying seed, filling a tube, waiting. I thought the birds were just finding food. But what's actually happening between you and the birds at your feeder is a two-way process that changes both sides. It changes their biology, their schedules, their breeding cycles, and in some cases, their long-term survival. And it changes you in a quieter way that I'm going to try to get at by the end of this video. Welcome to the channel. If you're new here, please subscribe before you leave. I put out new videos on backyard bird behavior every week, and what we're going through today is the kind of thing that, once you understand it, changes how you stand at the window in the morning. Today, we're going through 7 things that happen, really happen, when you feed backyard birds every day. The science on some of these surprised me. Number 5 is the one I resisted for a long time, and number 7 is the one I've been trying to find the right words for about 2 years. Stay until the end. Number 1, they know your schedule. Here's what most people don't know. When you start filling a feeder on a regular schedule, same time each morning, same days each week, the birds near your yard don't just learn where the food is, they sync to you, to your specific routine. The research on this, work coming out of the University of Exeter and documented in Dr. Darrell Jones's long-term study of feeder relationships, describes what's called conditioned food site fidelity. That's a technical way of saying something simpler. Birds don't just remember the feeder, they build a behavioral routine around the person who fills it. They learn when you typically appear. They learn what your presence signals, not as a general threat, but as a specific, predictable event. What this means for your yard is this. If you fill your feeder at 7 a.m. on weekdays, your regular birds will often be at or near the feeder between 6:30 and 7. Not because they arrived randomly and waited, because they know. The chickadees, the titmice, the cardinals who have been coming long enough, they've built your schedule into their morning. I noticed this with the Tuesday couple about 18 months in. I started filling my tube feeder later on weekends, closer to 9 instead of 7, and within a few weeks, I noticed they were arriving later too. I'd changed my schedule. They'd changed theirs. I didn't set out to test anything, but the result was the same. There's something worth sitting with in that. You think the birds come to the feeder. They do, but some of them are also coming to you, to the version of you that shows up every morning at the same time with a bag of sunflower seeds. To a bird that has never fully decided whether you're safe, that's not nothing. Number 2, some of them know your face. I want to be careful with this one because it sounds like the kind of thing people say about their pets, and backyard birds aren't pets. But the research here is specific enough that I'd be doing you a disservice not to mention it. Work coming out of the University of Washington, Dr. John Marsliff's team, studies going back almost 20 years, has documented that wild songbirds, including species common at backyard feeders, recognize individual human faces, not just familiar human versus stranger. Individual faces. They communicate information about specific people, safe, dangerous, unpredictable, to other birds in their social group. The research focused heavily on crows, and the Hatfields in my yard, the crow family I've been watching for 3 years now, are a good example of why. Early on, I had a neighbor kid throw something at one of them. I didn't realize it had happened until I noticed the crow's behavior around me changed. More distance, More alarm calls when I came out, even though I hadn't done anything. Information had spread. Someone who looked like they lived in this yard had done something, and the whole group recalibrated. But here's what the follow-on research shows. Chickadees do this too. The flight initiation distance, researchers call it AVUFID, is the distance at which a bird decides to fly away from an approaching human. For a bird that doesn't know you, that distance is typically 10 to 12 feet. For a bird that has identified you as a safe, consistent feeder human over multiple seasons, that distance can drop to 4 to 6 feet. Half. That bird is not tamer. It is specifically not afraid of you. This is not a bird that is habituated to humans. This is not a bird that has lost its wariness. This is a bird that has made an individual assessment about a specific person based on observed behavior over time and decided to extend a conditional kind of trust. I learned this the hard way with my orange jacket. But that's coming in item 5. Number 3. Your feeder is changing when they breed. At 4:43 in the morning, on a late February night that still has frost on it, a female northern cardinal near your feeder is already making a decision. She isn't at the feeder. She's in the holly bush or the cedar or whatever dense shrub is near your yard. And she is running a kind of body condition check, a biological accounting of how much fat she has, how much energy she can spare, whether this is the year and this is the week to begin the nesting cycle earlier than last year. Your feeder is part of that calculation. Research from Oxford and the British Trust for Ornithology, one of the largest long-term studies of supplemental feeding ever conducted, has documented something called carryover effects. The idea is simple, even if the mechanism isn't. What happens to a bird in winter shows up in what it does in spring. A bird that comes through February and March with better body condition because it had a reliable feeder will, in many cases, begin breeding earlier, not by a few days. In some species, the shift is up to 2 weeks earlier than unfed populations in the same region. 2 weeks earlier means the eggs hatch when the insect emergence peaks. The nestlings get fed during the window when caterpillar density is highest. More nestlings survive. You did not intend any of this. You put up a tube feeder and bought a bag of black oil sunflower seed. But somewhere in that chain of events, a cardinal's eggs hatched on a Thursday instead of 3 Tuesdays later, and more of them made it to fledging. I find this genuinely difficult to hold. It means that every year I fill that feeder through February and March, I'm not just keeping birds warm. I'm shifting timelines. I'm moving events. I'm part of cycles I can't see. Pay attention to this, because the next item is where that starts to feel heavier instead of lighter. Number 4. Some of them are counting on you, not as a bonus, as a necessity. I want to be honest about something. When I first started feeding birds, I told myself what most people tell themselves. It's a supplement. The birds will be fine without it. I'm not responsible. They have instincts. The Cornell Lab's long-term data on supplemental feeding, especially through winter cold snaps, tells a more complicated story. Most backyard birds, healthy adults in moderate winters, do fine without feeders. The feeder is bonus calories. But there's a gradient. At the other end of that gradient are smaller birds in severe cold, birds with compromised condition heading into a bad week, juncos and wrens and late-season birds that have already burned through their fat reserves. A dark-eyed junco weighs about 20 grams. In a night where the temperature drops below 42 degrees Fahrenheit and holds there, a healthy junco in good condition is burning through roughly 3% of its body weight in fat just to survive until sunrise. 3% doesn't sound like much until you do the math on a 20-gram bird hitting the 4th consecutive night of hard cold with reserves already drawn down. This is not guilt. I'm not trying to make you feel guilty, and I don't feel guilty myself. But I want to be straight about what I'm just supplementing their diet means in practice. For most birds, most of the time, it's true. For some birds in some weeks, the feeder is the difference. The mourning dove on your patio on the 5th day of a January cold snap, the one at the bottom of the dominance hierarchy, waiting for whatever the jays and cardinals leave. That bird is not supplementing. That bird is surviving. And it has been coming back to your yard, your specific yard, because the food was there yesterday. Number 5. Your feeder is also a hunting ground. And I didn't want to say that for a long time. Let me start with the Cooper's hawk. The Cooper's hawk that visits my yard comes roughly once a week, sometimes twice. I've been watching it for about 3 years. It comes in fast and low over the fence, and everything scatters. The chickadees into the holly, the cardinals into the oak, the doves underneath the feeder scrambling in every direction. And then, quiet. About 18 months ago, I started keeping track of whether it actually caught anything. The answer is yes. Not every visit, but regularly. In a typical week, if it visited twice, it was leaving with a bird maybe once, and the bird it was taking was almost always from my feeder area. I avoided saying this out loud to myself for a long time, but here's where it gets significantly worse. I was concentrating the prey. I had spent years building up a reliable, dense population of songbirds in a small area of my yard. I had made them predictable. Same feeders, same times, same locations. And predictable in the predator-prey relationship is a vulnerability. This is not that the feeder is bad. It's not that the Cooper's hawk is a problem. It's not that I should feel terrible. The hawk is doing exactly what a Cooper's hawk does, and it needs to eat too. What I needed to understand is that my feeder wasn't just a kindness I was offering birds. It was a change I was making to the local ecology, the density, the predictability, the territory. And that change had consequences I hadn't thought through. The research on this from Cornell's Habitat Management Group and broader work on predator-prey dynamics near supplemental feeding stations uses a term worth knowing: threat halo. When a predation event happens at a feeder, the birds in the surrounding area, not just the ones who witnessed it, but birds who received alarm calls, avoid the area for days to weeks afterward. Not because the food is gone, the food is still there. They avoid it because something dangerous happened in that place. And they remember. I learned this the hard way in November 2021. The hawk made a successful strike at my tube feeder on a Wednesday morning. I watched it. For the following 11 days, my feeder was almost empty during daylight hours. The seed sat there. The birds were in the yard. I could hear them. But they were not coming to the feeder. They had filed what happened, and they were staying back. After that, I moved the feeder closer to the holly bush and added a second shrub layer near the patio. Not because I thought I could stop the hawk. I couldn't, and I shouldn't try. But because I could at least give birds better escape cover. I'd been building a target. I could try to build a place with exits. You don't need to take the feeder down. I didn't. But you should know what it is. Number 6. The birds coming to your feeder today are not quite the same birds that would have come 30 years ago. And the birds coming in 30 years won't be the same as today's. This one takes the longest view. Work coming out of the University of Groningen and published in Current Biology has documented something called phenotypic plasticity in urban and feeder-adjacent bird populations. The short version: over multiple generations, birds living near consistent supplemental food sources show measurable changes, not evolutionary changes. We're not talking about speciation, but heritable behavioral and physical shifts. American goldfinches are the clearest example. Populations in regions with dense year-round feeder coverage in the eastern United States are showing lower migratory tendency than goldfinch populations in feeder-poor regions. Some birds that should, by instinct, be several hundred miles south of where they are in January aren't going. They're staying, because the feeder is there. In European studies, great tit populations near long-term feeders showed measurable differences in beak dimensions compared to non-feeder populations after roughly 15 to 20 generations. The beak was adapting, very slowly, to the feeder environment. I don't know what to do with that exactly. You put up a feeder to help birds survive the winter. You're doing something good. And also, over long timescales, you are part of a selection pressure that will slowly shift what those birds are. Both of those things are true at the same time, and I think you deserve to know both. Number 7. They've been watching you as long as you've been watching them. I've saved this one for last because I wasn't sure how to say it. When I started filling my feeder 5 years ago, I had a very clear mental model of what I was doing. I was observing. The birds were being observed. I was the one learning. They were the ones being learned about. That model feels right, and for a long time it held. And then about 2 winters ago, something shifted. Not in the birds. In me. I was standing at the kitchen window at 6 in the morning, the Tuesday couple at the feeder, same as always, and I realized I had started adjusting my own behavior around them. I wore quieter colors when I refilled the feeder after the orange jacket situation. I moved more slowly near the Japanese maple after the fledgling incident in May 2022. I had started coming inside at the times when the Cooper's hawk was likely to come through, not because I needed to be inside, but because I didn't want to be in the yard when the birds were on highest alert and something felt wrong. I had been doing all of this without quite noticing I was doing it. The birds hadn't trained me in any deliberate sense. They can't do that. But the relationship had slowly shaped my behavior the same way it had shaped theirs. I was part of their system. And without ever deciding to, I had let them become part of mine. This is not a spiritual claim. I want to be clear about that, and I'll come back to the distinction in a second. But there is something worth naming that the science doesn't quite reach. The research on anticipatory behavior toward specific humans, the work showing that long-term feeder birds will begin moving toward the feeder area before you arrive, based on learned schedule cues, frames this as a cognitive adaptation. The bird has learned to predict you. That's accurate. What it doesn't say, because it can't say it cleanly, is that being predicted by a wild animal feels like something. It is not the same as being recognized by a dog or a cat. It's stranger than that, and quieter. The bird is not asking anything from you. It is not performing. It has simply incorporated you into its understanding of how the world works, the same way it has incorporated the oak tree and the holly bush and the time of morning when the light changes. You are part of the pattern. About a month ago, on a cold Monday morning, the Tuesday couple's off day, when they don't usually come, I looked out the window and saw the male chickadee at the feeder alone. He sat there for a long time, longer than a feed, just sitting, looking around. And then he left. I don't know what that was. I'm not going to tell you it was anything. But I noticed it. And I thought about the notched feather cardinal that showed up the week my dad died in November 2020, the one that's been coming back every winter since. And I thought about how many mornings I've stood at this window, watching birds live their lives, not understanding most of it, but somehow feeling less alone for it. I'm not going to tell you the birds know you the way you're hoping to be known. I don't know that, and I'm not going to say it. But I can tell you that something has been built at that feeder. Call it what you want. I keep coming back to the window. So, here's where we are. You started filling a feeder. Maybe you wanted something nice to look at. Maybe a friend suggested it. Maybe you were home more than usual one winter and you just started paying attention. Whatever the reason, you put something out there. The birds came. And what happened next, it turns out, is a lot more than seed-changing hands. Your birds have learned your schedule. Some of them have learned your face. The ones who came through the cold with good body condition will nest earlier this spring because you kept that feeder full in February. Some of them, not all, but some, are genuinely counting on you during the hard weeks. They are also, without meaning to, teaching you things about patience, about observation, about what it feels like to be part of something you didn't plan and can't fully understand. The feeder in your yard is not just a feeder. It's a relationship, the kind you mostly maintain through small, reliable actions, showing up, keeping your word more or less, not making any sudden moves, being the kind of presence that the birds keep choosing to come back to. I think that's worth something, even if you can't put a name on it. Tell me in the comments, has a bird in your yard ever done something that made you feel, even for a second, like it knew you were there? Not just the feeder. You. I want to hear about it. I read everyone. I'll see you in the next one.